That's perfect. Now I would like to introduce our next speaker, Ibrahim Olabi. Ibrahim is a lawyer at Guernica 37, International Justice Chambers in the UK, and is the founder of the Syrian Legal Development Program, SLDP, an NGO that works on human rights issues in Syria since 2014. SLDP provides legal capacity building into Syrian NGOs, as well as working on human rights and business issues linked to the conflict. Through SLDP, Ibrahim has conducted human rights work in Syria, near the front lines, and advocated with policymakers and heads of states around many capitals. He has trained hundreds of Syrians, including victims, on complex legal matters relevant to torture, forced displacement, and chemical weapons. Ibrahim also consulted for the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights and the International Bar Association Human Rights Institute on Syria-related matters. He's made appearances on BBC and CNN, and today he's appearing here with us. Ibrahim.
Two very difficult performances to follow. One that shook my inner soul with her words, and the other one with his tunes. And I'm expected now to deliver a 15-minute speech. But let's give it a go. Usually, when we're invited to talk about Syria, it's a sad situation. It is not a happy occasion. But the reason, or one of the reasons why I agreed to come and speak today, and agreed is not out of ego, but it was because I had just a newborn, and so to get into trouble with my wife to come here, is because this is a happy occasion. For a change, we're meeting here today on a Saturday morning with a lot of young faces, and I appreciate how difficult that is given that it was Friday night and Halloween yesterday, so there's a lot of pressure mounting, to celebrate a human rights defender with a full house. And when Ruba was talking about what you can do, you've already done something today. You've attended, and you've sent a message. Human rights and defending human rights don't get caused by humanitarian disasters. The people that Ruba and her organization are working for, they did not flee because of volcanoes and earthquakes. Probably that's the only thing left in Syria to take place. But they fled because there are politicians who are committing human rights abuses. And this morning, you've all sent them a message. That at a time where human rights defenders are being defamed, they're being targeted, they're being discredited, they're being attacked, Bergen says no. Bergen says we're here to celebrate those who defend human rights. And that is a political message that you're sending today. So I thank you. Now, delivering this speech is a little slightly challenging. One, because as I said, it's a happy occasion, and therefore I don't want to depress you about Syria and try to keep the positive spirit, which is a difficult situation. But also I'm somehow supposed to sum up 8 years in about 8 minutes. I'm a lawyer, I suck at math, it's not my thing. But I try to somehow come up with very short yes and no statements about Syria. Hopefully that will all, kind of try to get the information forward. And I've chosen 11 yes and no statements. And 11 is not an arbitrary number. It does answer a lot of my security questions. Because 2011 is a date that every Syrian remembers. It is the date that some of you might think we hate, because it's the start of the Syrian conflict, or it's the start of brutality. But if you ask the majority of Syrians, they'll tell you 2011 is a date they'll treasure forever. And so I'll take you through these 11 yes and no statements quickly. So yes, there is a conflict in Syria. But no, the conflict did not start in 2011. What started in 2011 is a peaceful uprising like the one we see in Lebanon today, asking for the most basic of political and human rights. The conflict, the armed conflict, started about 2012, when the Syrian army started shooting on the protesters, on those who demanded their rights. Some of those fighters defected from the army and started shooting back, and that's when the Syrian conflict started. And I know for journalists and media, it's difficult to figure out one word to say what started from 2011, but I myself say no. The Syrian conflict did not start in 2011. What started in 2011 was a peaceful, beautiful uprising against dictatorship. And yes, civilians are killed in Syria. Hospitals are destroyed. Refugees are fleeing. But make no mistake, because no, these civilians are not a result of war. They're not killed as a result of collateral damage. They are specifically targeted. You cannot incidentally cause rape. You cannot incidentally torture 14,000 people and summary execute them in regime cells like Amnesty reported. When the UN Commission of Inquiry interviewed 504 Syrian women about rape in regime cells, that cannot be a result of war. That is a result of persecution. So make no mistake by conflating the two. And yes, everyone is talking about a political solution for Syria. But no, Syria is not a political problem. When you say the word political problem in the UK, the first thing that comes to your mind is Brexit, elections, Labour, Conservatives, Liberal Democrats. But that's not why 400,000 civilians lost their lives. They lost it because they were particularly targeted. So Syria is not a political problem in the normal sense. It's not opposition and regime and meetings in Geneva. Yes, that's part of the process. But it's a human rights problem. And yes, there is a civil war in Syria. I used to hate using this term up until 2016. But no, it's not just a civil war. It's a proxy war. It involves the US, it involves Russia, it involves Turkey, it involves Iran, it involves Saudi, it involves the UK, it involves Europe. Almost every country is in one way or other involved in Syria. And that might seem like a depressing fact, but it's also an opportunity, because where one state is present, another state could be present. And when it is difficult to achieve things on a domestic level, perhaps the international community could step up its game. Yes, absolutely you should question and be critical of mainstream media. We've seen issues in the past. I'm not going to use Trump's words of how he describes the media, but yes, we should be critical of mainstream media, but on the other hand, not believe everything with the alternative media, Russia Today, or what we read by average Joe on social media. I was told he's called Olna Norman in Norway. So whatever Olna Norman says on Syria, it's not strictly true. Even those who say, because Syria, there's a lot of propaganda and disinformation going on, that say that I've been to Syria, and therefore that somehow gives them the legitimacy to talk about everything that's happening in Syria. Question, where have they been? What have they reported? You cannot go to government-held areas and discredit crimes in opposition-held areas in the same way that you cannot visit opposition-held areas and discredit crimes that took place in regime-held areas. See, I'm not sure if this is counting down or counting up, but I'm just going to keep going. Yes, Syria was a beautiful country that you may have visited, your friends, it's beautiful, it's culture, but that's not the Syria we saw. So no, beyond this culture, behind these nice buildings and walls and stone, probably a few meters below the ground, there are people being tortured. We saw Syria as a police state, as a dictatorship. And so when politicians come out and say, by probably a speech written by their intern, no offense to their intern, and say, we want to give Syrians back the life they had, we say no thanks. We don't want to get the Syria we had. We want a better Syria. It's not about water and electricity and stone and these very nice window dressings, cosmetics. Yes, it's important, it's part of our heritage, but there is far more to Syria than the stone. There are the people. And so, no, you might see a lot of companies trying, but they're actually trying to advertise tourism now to Syria. I've seen 2 French tourism companies that take you to certain specific areas, all on your own with about 60 military vans around you to see the things that they want you to see, to say, look, Syria is safe. Yes, refugees fled Syria. But no, most of them did not flee war. They fled persecution. And while war might end by a reduction of bombings and shellings, persecution does not. Persecution is about torture, arbitrary detention, enforced disappearance, all acts that are caused by those who still remain in power in Syria. Yes, many European states want refugees to return. And yes, a lot of refugees do want to return. But no, the conditions are not there yet. Syria is not safe. Refugees are being used as a bargaining chip by different political powers involved in Syria in order for them to say, return refugees, that will trigger reconstruction funding, all the Russian companies and Iranian companies will start making their money off that. They're all being used as a political tool. Please do not fall into that trap. And yes, state sovereignty is important, but not when it comes at the cost of the state being the primary perpetrator in Syria. By no means is the state the only perpetrator. Almost all parties to the conflict committed crimes. That is not something that we can shy away from. But to equate and conflate the numbers risks us harming the narrative, not being able to talk about transitional justice, not being able to address the victims' needs when we say and hide behind all parties to the conflict committed crimes. Because the numbers are nowhere near proportionate. And yes, war crimes in Syria are very well documented. But no, there hasn't been any political power or any political will to hold these perpetrators to account. Yes, you might have heard that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was killed a few days ago, the leader of ISIS. And yes, ISIS was responsible for the most horrendous crimes. But the main perpetrator is still there. And in fact, they're being re-legitimized as a partner of the international community, as a partner in reconstruction, as we speak. It is absolutely fine not to know who to support in Syria. That is okay. I don't know who to support in Syria. There's too many groups, too many factions, too many ideas, too many options. But in my opinion, it is a crime not to know who to oppose. And these are very two different things. I've been working on Syria for the last 6-7 years. I've been to the front lines. I've had to conduct the most difficult interviews with victims of torture and rape. I've seen firsthand what a barrel bomb looks like when it explodes. I still suffer until now when something gets dropped in the kitchen or there's a helicopter flying. I still, to this very day, have to check when I'm in Norway whether this plane is a civilian aircraft or a military aircraft. So yes, The work on Syria has been depressing. It's difficult, it's emotional. We lost many, many friends. We lost many family members. But no, we will not give up hope. Thank you.